Hi, this is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. One of the things I'd like to talk about today is black and white photography. I've done some videos on doing black and white conversions from color to black and white from digital files. You'll find them in some of the earlier posts that we've made on this channel. But I wanted to talk about a way of looking at a scene so that you can make a real interesting black and white photograph. It's easy to think that all you need is a really good process for converting color from black and white, and that alone is going to make an interesting black and white photograph because you treat it in a particular way or use some sort of filter. But there's so much more that goes into a really good black and white photograph, and I picked 3 pictures to help to illustrate just that idea. Here's a picture by James Ramos. He shot this with a Fuji X100S at 160th of a second at f8 at ISO 800. So we have these portraits of these guys who I assume are working in a kitchen or a restaurant of some sort. And one of the things about black and white is it's always about contrast, the contrast between light and dark. It's about tonality, about a range of tones. We don't have color anymore. So when you remove color, the photograph tends to be a little simpler to read. And we look at it in terms of brightness, in terms of contrast, in terms of pattern, in terms of shape, in a way that you don't immediately register when you're looking at a color image because the color itself can be such a draw. So as a photographer, you have to be conscious of that fact when you're photographing a scene because with your naked eye, you're seeing the scene in color. So unless your camera is set for a black and white view like it is with some of the mirrorless cameras, you really don't know what it's going to look like in black and white until you make the conversion later in Photoshop. So you have to start sort of training your eye to see that even though you're seeing the scene naturally in color. If you take a look at the guy on the right, his outfit, his skin tone, his pants, contrast really nicely with that wall, which is being rendered as gray. Now, I don't know what the original color of that building is. Only James knows. But you can still see that despite the fact we're not seeing color, we are seeing tones. And that creates a contrast where he's really clearly defined in that space. Now, if we take a look at the guy on the left, the background behind him is much more dramatically contrasty. The area behind him, which could be an alley or some sort of passageway, goes immediately to black. So his white outfit stands out even more contrasty. It makes the cigarette in his right hand really stand out in a way that it might not if that contrast was a lot less. But you can see how these guys are wearing very similar outfits. Their skin tones are almost similar, but you can see how they are rendered slightly differently as a result of what's not only behind them, but the tonality of the things that are behind them. And that's one of the things that I'm always sort of keeping an eye for when I'm thinking about a scene in which I'm thinking, I want to render this as black and white. Some people will take color images and then after the fact will think, okay, I'll see how this might look as a black and white. But that leaves a lot of things to chance. I think it's really important to walk out and actively try to envision what a scene would look like in black and white. And one of the easiest ways to be able to do that is by simply looking at contrast between light and dark. And with portraits, it's as you can see here, it's a very powerful tool. If James had made individual photographs of these guys and had placed them so that the guy on the right was completely against the wall and that this guy was in this area of shadow, and they were 2 separate images, they both would be very interesting photographs because of the contrast that's created. So there were a lot of choices here, and I really love how the pairing of the guys here works so nicely. And of course, the body language and the expressions here are really, really great. But again, contrast. Pay attention to that. Now here's a shot by IRQ506. Don't have any XF information on this shot. But again, think about light and dark. Here, the lighting is really, really dramatic. We have the light that's hitting the skyscrapers behind the subject that is moving across the frame here. So we'll pay attention to that because that's one of the first things your eyes are drawn to. One of the things that I've mentioned before is this whole idea of what we're drawn to visually when we take a look at a picture. Oftentimes, it's the brightest element in the scene. That's where our eye goes first. Then there's contrast. Then there's pattern. And there's sharpness. And all of these things are playing a role here. So if you take a look at the skyscrapers, that's really where our eyes are kind of drawn first because all those qualities are possessed by those elements. The brightness of the buildings, the pattern, the overall sharpness, the contrast. It's sort of a set piece for this person that walks in across the frame. Now, we have a little bit of light on their face, and that helps to draw our eye to them because there's this area of contrast created by the light area on the subject's cheek and how the rest of their face is relegated to shadow. So even though the buildings themselves are so much brighter and our eyes go there, we're pulled back to that small area of the face because as human beings, we're naturally drawn to the face. But that area of contrast is really an important part of why this image works. If you imagine this shot without the human figure, you would have a very sort of interesting exploration of shapes and patterns in a black and white image. But having this human figure in here serves as a visual contrast to these strong lines and patterns that exist throughout the entire frame. It creates this very interesting counterpoint. You can see that this person is moving through the frame because of the position of the leg and how they're looking over their shoulder to the left. It adds a dynamic, contrasting element to everything that's happening, to everything else that's happening in the frame, which is fairly static. There's some energy expressed by this, what I'm assuming is a woman as she moves through the frame. And I just love how these lines, especially on the right-hand side here, cut down and help direct us here to this area here. And it seems, even though you sort of explore all these other areas where they're very bright, you always end up coming here, even though this area of brightness is so small. And it just exemplifies how just a little bit of contrast can really make a huge difference. We do have this bright area down here, what looks like a van. So this is kind of bright as compared to here. If anything, I would probably try to dodge this down because I don't know if this area here actually helps the image. If it were my photograph, I would probably just burn it. But that's the kind of stuff I'm trying to be conscious of when I'm out there photographing a scene. Is I'm always looking at, okay, what's the brightest element in the frame? What's the area of contrast? What's the pattern that's involved in the overall composition? Because all those choices of what I choose to include or exclude are going to have a huge impact in the success or the failure of the photograph. Okay, here's a shot by Anthony Bautista. No EXIF information over here. But look at this shot, and if you walked into this scene and you saw this kid playing in the fountain, you would look at it literally just as that. This kid playing in the fountain, having fun. But, Ron does a great job here in using contrast. There's the contrast of all these dark tones, like in the water and in the area immediately behind the fountain, the figure of the child itself, and the brighter areas of the backlit water. The light coming from behind the water creates this sort of brighter areas that contrast with those darker elements in the shot. You can look at this and go, this is about water, but this is just as much about light as it is about the water that pervades the entire image here. But think about what I was saying about the other two images. Contrast. That's very evident here. That's really at the heart of the image. There is some pattern here in terms of the pattern that's created by the water, the fountain, even on the area where in the pond or the area on the bottom of the frame where the water is probably relatively more still, but there's still pattern there. There's sharpness. There's shape. This is very graphic image. It's very graphic in much the same way as the previous image was. When you're photographing in black and white, you really have to pay attention to patterns and shapes and lines because they become that much more emphasized. They become that much more important when you convert something over to a black and white image. We pay attention to that more. And see how the child here, even though it's only a very small percentage of the frame, the child is in stark contrast with the area immediately behind them. And so our eyes go straight to the kid. Now, if the photographer had shifted more to the left, the child would not be standing out as much as it does here around this sort of bright area in the frame. Instead, they would be positioned against the sort of darker tones immediately behind the kid, and their shape would be a lot less discernible. So it's really important to pay attention to things, small things like this, because the position here is great, but you can imagine you could easily just lose it completely if you weren't paying attention to those areas of that area of contrast, which is really, really key here. So when you're out there shooting, if you do have the benefit of a mirrorless camera or a camera that provides you the ability to be able to look through your viewfinder using black and white, that's a great way of sort of training your eye, but you don't necessarily have to have that. If you just take a look at the world in terms of brightness and contrast, you can start training your eye to look at it, even if you don't have the benefit of such a camera. So hope you enjoyed that video. If you are not part of our Flickr group, you can just do a search on the Candid Frame on Flickr, ask to be added, and I'll be glad to add your images here to the Candid Frame. And I pull from these images each week to produce these short videos for you. And if you have not heard of the Candid Frame Photography Podcast, it is a podcast in which I feature conversations with some of the world's best photographers. This week I had an interview with Lee Von Biss, and as you can see with this image here, he took this picture of this insect, this bee. But he didn't take this picture with just a single photograph. He produces these images using 5,000 to 10,000 individual photographs and stitches them together. It's really, really remarkable. You can just go to thecandidframe.com and listen to that interview, as well as 300 other conversations that I've had with photographers from all over the world, from all different genres of photography. You can subscribe to the candidframe.com by visiting iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we also have a free Candid Frame app, which is available for Windows, for Apple iOS, and Android. And it's all free, and you'll find links to all that at thecandidframe.com. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.